Hello and welcome to my YouTube channel. Check out my log burner. I've just had it fitted quite recently, well a few months ago, and I'm really quite pleased with it so far. It kind of takes me back to when I was a kid. So when I was younger, my grandparents had an open fire back then, and having this log burner here just kind of brings back those memories, those kind of childhood memories of winter evenings, sitting in front of the fire, watching the flames. For me, there's nothing really like a real fire. I mean, central heating is great, of course. So is a gas fire or an electric fire. In terms of the convenience of just being able to switch it on and have instant heat, of course, that's great. But it just doesn't have the ambience of a real flame. And I think that sitting around a fire is just kind of something that evokes ancestral memories. Something that we humans have been doing for thousands, hundreds of thousands of years. And especially in autumn and winter, when those dark nights draw in, there's just something about being able to gather around the fire and have a drink, have a chat, exchange stories. It's something that I think is very deep-rooted in every human culture. And of course, another very old tradition associated with sitting around a fire is to tell ghost stories. And that really is the thing that inspired this channel, because I happen to have quite a collection of ghost stories that I've gathered over the years. And in my forthcoming videos, I'm going to share some of the most interesting and the most intriguing ones. All of them are purportedly true. I say purportedly because for most of them, I'm neither an eyewitness, nor have I personally talked to anyone who was an eyewitness. But nonetheless, the sources that I took these stories from all claim these to be true accounts. And I also have a few stories from people who I know personally, who have told me about their own personal first-hand experiences. And I even have one or two stories of my own. And this first story that I'm going to share with you tonight, this is actually my own personal experience. I've had a few strange experiences in my time, but only once so far in my life have I ever actually seen a ghost. Now, whether or not you believe me is up to you. I can't prove that I'm telling the truth. I know that ghosts exist because I've seen one. And having seen one, I can't do anything other than believe in them. Now, if you yourself have never seen a ghost, then obviously you don't have any proof, and I'm afraid I can't give you any proof beyond my own testimony. But those of us who have seen a ghost, we know what the truth is, even though we can't prove it to anyone else. Anyway, here's my story, and again, it's up to you whether or not you believe it. It happened quite a while ago, over 25 years ago in actual fact. I was a student at the time. I would have been about 20 years old or so. So I'm kind of giving my age away here. But the story actually takes place in what had been my old school, my old primary school. I'd been a pupil there back in the 1980s. And it wasn't a terribly old school. It was built, I believe, just after the Second World War. So at the time when this event happened, it would have been no more than about 50 years old, if that. There were rumours that the school had been built on an old graveyard, but whether that's true or not, I've no idea. The building itself was, I guess, pretty typical of a post-war state school building. It's built out of brick. I can't show you a picture, unfortunately, because I don't have one, and I can't take one now because the school has actually been demolished. It was knocked down quite a few years ago. but it was located near Barnsley in South Yorkshire, and no more than a couple of miles from where I'm sitting right now. I remember when we were kids, we used to tell stories about how the school was supposedly haunted, and I guess there's nothing unusual in that, because probably every school has its ghost story, because of course that's what kids do. They tell scary stories to try and scare each other and so on. But there were lots of stories about this particular school, and supposedly the resident phantom was a green lady. And I remember swapping stories with my friends about this green lady. One of my friends, when we were about 9 years old, claimed to have actually seen it, and I remember he even drew a picture. And from what I remember of the picture, again, it was a very long time ago, but from what I remember of the picture, it looked like a kind of a cross between a woman and a monster. I don't think he actually really did see anything. I think it was probably just something that he made up. But anyway, the years went by, and of course, as we got older, we left primary school, we went to secondary school. After that, I went on to college to do A-levels. After that, I went to university, and I was still a student at the time when the story takes place. Now, in the intervening years, after I'd left primary school, my mother actually started working there as a member of staff. She was a teaching assistant, first of all, and then she did a parent support role. So obviously working at the school, she came to know the place and the other staff members pretty well. It was quite a small school, so everyone knew each other pretty well. And my mother started to hear stories, and not just from the kids, but also from several of the staff members as well, who claimed to have experienced things and seen things at the school. I'm not going to give any names, and I'm not even going to give the name of the school, because I think it's only fair to preserve the anonymity of these people. But a number of staff members and even visitors to the school claimed to have seen things, including the headmaster, and also some of the cleaners. Apparently some of the cleaners refused to work in the part of the school where most of the disturbances took place. A couple of workmen were apparently doing some repairs to the school, and they had an experience where a door mysteriously closed and locked itself and locked them out of the building. But the person who perhaps had the most experiences was the caretaker. And obviously that's perhaps not surprising, given that he was, for obvious reasons, the person who spent most time after hours when the school was quiet. He was the person who spent most time on site. And also, most of the disturbances seemed to happen down on the bottom corridor, which was down where the caretaker's office was based. And this was the area of the building where most of the incidents were reported. So my story takes place one day in 1997. It was springtime, and I think it was either the Easter holidays or Spring Bank. I can't quite remember which it was, but it was definitely the school holidays, and it was definitely the spring. And on this particular day, the only two people who were in the school, the kids were off, obviously, the only two people who were in the school were the school secretary and the caretaker. And the secretary in particular was quite a close friend of my mother's. And she and the caretaker were in the building alone. So the secretary was up in the school office, the admin office, and the caretaker had just gone down to the bottom corridor to his base to do whatever he did down there. But apparently he'd only been gone a few minutes when he suddenly reappeared in the admin office with his face as white as a sheet. And he claimed that he'd seen a door open itself, so not just kind of blowing in the wind, but the knob actually turned, the door opened on its own, and then closed And apparently the caretaker thought that he had locked that door previously, so he went to try the handle and the door was still locked. So this experience scared the living daylights out of him. I mean, even though he'd seen things before, he was really quite frightened by this, and he kind of ran back up to the admin office, really in quite a state of shock from what he had just witnessed. So the secretary, who again was a good friend of my mother's, she actually called my mother to tell her what had happened, and we were only a short distance away from the school. I was there at home at the time. So the secretary told my mother, and my mother told me what had happened. And I said, well, why don't we go down and have a look for ourselves, see if we can see anything. So we did. We got in the car and we drove down to the school, and we walked up to the admin office. We talked to the secretary. We talked to the caretaker, who was still quite shaken. And then we went down to the bottom corridor to investigate for ourselves. Now, the first thing that I noticed, and this wasn't my imagination, this was real, the corridor was freezing cold. Now, this was a warm spring day. It was quite sunny outside. I remember clearly it was brightly lit. It wasn't dark, it wasn't in shadow. The sunshine was shining quite brightly through the windows. It was warm, fairly warm outside, spring day, but the corridor was freezing cold. It was the middle of the afternoon. I hadn't been drinking. I was absolutely stone cold sober, so was my mother, but there was just this uncanny atmosphere. Now, I'm willing to accept that there might have been an element of suggestion based on what I'd just been told, the story I'd just heard. Maybe there was an element of suggestion, and maybe the feeling of uneasiness, maybe that was just in my own mind. But what wasn't in my own mind was this chill, this low temperature. That was real. That was definitely real. Anyway, we walked down to the end of the corridor, and we reached the door, which the caretaker had seen open and close. And I actually tried this door myself, and it was still locked. So we just kind of stood there for a few minutes, kind of looking at this door. And I remember I said something like, "Come on, Ghosty, show yourself," or something like that. Nothing happened. We stood there for a few moments, just kind of looking around, and there was nothing to see. So after a few minutes, we turned to head back up the corridor, heading back towards the admin office. And we were halfway up the corridor when I just turned around for kind of a last look. And standing right in the middle of the corridor, next to this door, was a figure. It was definitely there. It wasn't a shadow. It was too three-dimensional to be a shadow. It was person-shaped. It was standing right in the middle of the corridor. It wasn't a green lady, or at least it wasn't green. I couldn't see whether or not it was male or female because it was indistinct. There were no features as such. It was just a person-shaped apparition, just kind of a grey colour, if anything. And I have to admit, the shock scared the daylights out of me. And I remember I shouted something. I can't remember exactly what I shouted, but I think it was probably swearing. And as I shouted, my mother also turned around. But as she turned around, the thing just vanished. It just disappeared. It was only there for a second. As she turned, it disappeared. So she didn't see it, but I saw it. I definitely saw it. It was only there for a second, but I know I definitely saw this thing. And again, it frightened me. And I kind of half walked, half ran back up the corridor. I kind of legged it back up to the admin office. And, so then there were kind of two of us in a state of shock, me and the caretaker, and it took us both, a while to kind of put ourselves together. So that was back in 1997, and that's the only time that I've ever seen a ghost. There have been a number of other occasions when I've had strange experiences, and I'll share some of those in future videos, but that was the only time that I actually saw a ghost so far in my life. And again, I know that what I saw was real. I don't claim to know what ghosts are. I'm not saying that they're necessarily spirits of the dead. I don't know what they are. All I can say is that they represent a phenomenon which at this time is unknown to science. Perhaps in the future scientists will discover what ghosts are. They'll maybe be able to explain the phenomena in scientific terms one day. But for now, I have no idea. I have no idea what causes this phenomenon. All I can say is that having seen it with my own eyes, I have no doubt that it exists. And again, I have no idea what this thing was doing there. So obviously some people believe that ghosts are spirits of the dead. Maybe they are, maybe not, I don't know. Some people believe that ghosts are recordings, that they're kind of, rather than being conscious beings as such, that they're some kind of natural recording that, somehow gets imprinted in a place, that, that somehow people or events or maybe emotions somehow get imprinted in a particular location, be it a building or a place or even an object. There are these different theories, these different hypotheses as to what a ghost is. And again, I'm not saying that any of these theories or hypotheses are correct or incorrect. I've obviously wondered at the time, and have wondered since, what this thing was and why it was there, and what connection it might have had with the history of the building or the site. Again, whether the stories were true about the school being built over an old graveyard, it's quite likely that there might have been mine workings underneath, because Barnsley is absolutely full of old mine workings, very heavily mined back in the day. It's possible that there might have been some old underground workings beneath the school. Maybe something happened down there back in the day, many years before, or maybe something happened above ground in that location, either before the school was built or after the school was built. Maybe some event, some incident, some tragedy, some traumatic event happened. I have no idea. I have really no idea. All I can say is it manifested in the shape of a person, and it also apparently had the ability to open and close a door, so it had the ability to affect or manipulate a physical object. Why and for what purpose? Whether it was a conscious entity trying to get attention, and if so, for what purpose? Your guess is as good as mine. So that's my story, and as I say, I have a few others, a few other personal experiences, but also experiences shared with me by people that I know personally, and also I have a great number of other tales as well that I have collected from various sources, and in the coming videos I'll share some of these stories with you. So, have you seen a ghost? Have you had any personal experience, or are you a complete non-believer? If you are a non-believer, I don't blame you. If you yourself haven't had an experience, then you've got no reason necessarily to believe. And again, I can't prove it to you beyond my own testimony. But I would be interested to hear your thoughts, whether you are a believer or a non-believer. But particularly if you've had any experiences of your own, I'd be very interested to hear about those. So please feel free to post those in the comments section below. Thanks very much for listening to this first video. I hope you found it entertaining. And if you are interested in hearing my other stories, then please subscribe to my channel. Thanks for listening to this video, and I hope to see you on the next one. Thanks very much.